David Macphail, hello. Lovely to speak to you.
Oh,
So,
and you,
sorry?
you too, Chris.
You too, I bet it is. I bet it is. Wonderful. So, David Macphail, the Edinburgh International Book Festival is back. It's back and better and bigger than ever. The mix of the hybridized online in-person events. Were you a regular fixture at the book festival?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure about regular. I've been there about 4 or 5 times over the years. So yeah, I've been quite a few times, and I always look forward to it.
Yeah.
It's a huge highlight. When I got my first book published, my first kids book, it was really, I think, probably the first festival that invited me. So it was my first moment, and it was just amazing. And my daughter had just been born, and I remember being inside the tent. I can't remember which tent it was, and the kids wild and just applauding and laughing. The event was fantastic. And then I went outside, and my wife and my little girl that's just been born, she was in a pram, and my mum as well. And it was like just the perfect moment. And I'll never, ever forget Edinburgh for that, you know.
Oh, that's wonderful. That is absolutely wonderful. I imagine that sort of the community that they try to develop, and those moments, those little moments where people are connected through the literature. That's what it always tried to create, isn't it? And it's so nice now with the mixture of online and in-person events that it's doing this year. The accessibility and the way that people are able to access these things and the talks and the events. Let's hope they can recreate that, even though it's online. That's absolutely fantastic. So you know, for Thorfinn, the awesomest Viking, your successful series for kids.
Yeah, I've got Thorfinn here somewhere behind me, and I've also got Velda.
Velda.
Who's the other one? The two troublemakers are together here somewhere. Yeah.
Was it always Vikings? Did you always think, oh, you can't get better in terms of snaring a child's imagination and their interest? Was Viking? You always just thought Vikings, that's the way to go.
Well, I always thought Vikings. You know, you're a hook as a writer, a big hook for a series or even an individual book. And to me, Vikings, especially in Britain, are a really big thing. And I did take one of the Thorfinn books to a book festival in Dubai, and I had a group of kids in front of me, and they didn't have was. I had to explain they didn't have them. I mean, they had pirates and stuff, so I had to kind of explain along those lines. But especially for people in Britain, where we have this historical experience of Vikings, people in northwestern Europe, then it's a really big thing, and it's taught in schools. That's the important thing. Kids all across the UK do the Vikings and the Anglo-Saxons and all that as part of their, their school study. So I kind of thought that was a thing. But then even in America, the Vikings are a big thing as well. I think that from a purely commercial point of view, it's a pretty good idea. But they're also fun. Not that I would like to meet a Viking on a dark night or even on the beach in the middle, you know.
Yeah. I hate when I'm on a beach and I see a longboat coming up and I think, here comes trouble. Because historically that's what they did. I completely agree with you, because I'm from Leeds originally, and we had York nearby, which was obviously Jorvik, and so a massive day out for everyone sort of in schools and stuff like that was to go to Jorvik and see the Viking experience. I also grew up on a diet of like films like The Vikings with Kirk Douglas, and Einar, and that theme tune, so graphically violent and gruesome.
I still sing the song. I sometimes I must have watched it 1,000 times when I was a kid.
Yeah, me too. Because there wasn't censorship like there is today. We could see a man getting his hand cut off and jumping in with the wolves. Better days, the 50s. Fantastic. So how important would you say, the transportive effects of literature and the kind of books that you write for children, do you think that's become much more important in the past, year, 18 months, for people to have that sense of escapism in what they're reading and the joy that comes, especially with children's literature?
I think been fairly, for the entire world, it's been really kind of kind of tumultuous with everything that's been happening. But I suppose from a very personal level, from a family level, from the experience of not just an individual child, but the experience of an adult, it's been a very personal experience because we've all been trapped in our houses. And I mean, I'm one of the lucky ones because I've got people with me. So many people in the world did not have anyone, and it could have been a very distance for a lot of people. But I have a house full, and I have a dog, so I had an excuse to go out twice a day, even in the worst part of the pandemic. I live in the country. I've got access to the countryside, so I was one of the lucky ones who wasn't trapped in a city centre in a tower block or something like that. That could have been very, very difficult. But I do think it has been very, very important to have these escapes. And a lot of people have wanted to escape from the pandemic and the stresses of that, but they've also wanted to escape from the house. This experience of being locked down in your own house. And stuff like, for kids especially, stuff like historical fiction and fantasy and magical worlds and stuff, I think that really does help, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't quite relate because my reading, I got really into nonfiction. But I don't know why. I rapidly run out of patience usually with fiction, you know, especially if the prose. I did a degree in English literature, so I became the most sort of unconscionable snob of prosaic fiction. But long form sort of nonfiction, something like Hellraisers about the boozers of the '60s and Richard Harris and Oliver Reed and stuff like that.
It was fantastic.
It was brilliant. Robert Sellers, yeah, fantastic. I loved it to death. Because I'm so interested in those stories, you know, because it's stranger than fiction, isn't it? You know, real life. So the transportive elements of that going to the 1960s and the film sets and Oliver Reed drinking 120 beers and stuff like that, that was what I found to be my escape, actually.
I love that. Yeah, that's interesting. That, you know, that's obviously non-fiction going in, but it's still an escape, no matter which way you look at it. But I know a lot in children's fiction, we have a lot of books about magical worlds and fantasy worlds, and boys or girls who have this secret identity, and they have to be, they go through this whole process of change, and there's a lot of that around for me. But and that's great. That's fantastic. But for me, a lot of the best children's literature is contemporary. And you know, take for example Anthony McGowan. He wrote these books. The whole, I think there's 4 books, and he's called it The Shape of Things. But they're quite contemporary. They're a bit reminiscent of Kes or something like that. Okay. And I mean, they're just in there, and it doesn't have to be a magical world, I think, for kids. And yeah, that's another thing about nonfiction, because I do write nonfiction as well, and I tend to get, when I'm writing, even if it is nonfiction, I tend to get wrapped up in this different world. I've been never busier than during the pandemic, and I have quite often had, you know, even sitting here at my desk, I've been in a world away, you know. Yeah, and that's a good thing.
No, it really is. A couple of things. It's funny you should mention Kes. I was watching parts from Kes yesterday because it was Yorkshire Day, the most celebrated day of everyone from Yorkshire. I asked my girlfriend why she didn't get me a present for Yorkshire Day, and she said, "Oh, I didn't know what it was." You know, the whippet comes round on a night and brings you a flat cap full of tea cakes. And the other thing was, what was the other thing? Oh, David, I've forgotten my second thought. The transportive aspects of it and what you look for. Because I was just reading Bill Bryson. I've been reading some Bill Bryson and travel writing, and I think with that there's almost that in itself sort of has now sort of become high fantasy. The mundanity of his day-to-day life of going on buses and trains and going everywhere, and that mobility. It's interesting, just like you say, the regular day-to-day now seems, you know, worlds away. Which makes nonfiction so much more interesting. What sort of nonfiction are you writing? Have you been writing nonfiction in the last, in the pandemic?
Yeah. Well, I write a lot of books and things like that. So I've written books on such subjects as migration and and that's quite challenging actually, because things are transforming so much. And I don't just mean because of the pandemic, which has transformed everything. I mean, it's thrown all the cards up in the air. We don't know how it's going to fall. So, I mean, that will. But there's other stuff going on, like things like Brexit and everything, and there's big changes globally. So, I mean, it's a difficult subject to write about just now. But that's certainly, it's also the history of it. So, writing about the history of what happened with migration from the beginning of human times, you tend to get very wrapped up in the research and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, I've written about subjects as I've written about Alexander Selkirk, who's a Scottish sailor from way back in the 1700s, who was a castaway on a desert island, and he became the inspiration for Robinson Crusoe.
Right.
So I find even just researching stuff like that involves me doing a whole lot of reading historical texts and getting really wrapped up in things like that. I mean, text that maybe no one has read much for several hundred years, and I find that very interesting. You know, looking at things manifests going back into the 1700s and finding out what went on board ships. It's amazing. You know, yeah. Whether it's fiction or non-fiction, there is something to transport you. There's something. Yeah. There's some element of escape.
Absolutely, and it's good that you've got that sort of balance. So, do you find that it's quite refreshing? So, the Thorfinn, the Velda books, they sound like sort of quite escapist fantasy fiction or historical fiction for children. So then do you find that you tend to go back and forth from one to the other? So you can be in your escapist, lovely, having fun, and then it's go quickly back to the essays and the treatises on migration.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to say I take one project at a time, but because writing is my livelihood, it's what I do, quite often I'm working on 3 different projects at once. But that's good. Well, not only got work, but also because, you know, you're never going to get bored, because you can get up in the morning and you're working on, you say, well, I'll work on something. I'll try and be funny from 9 till 11, and then I'll try and be deadly serious about some important non-fiction subject between 11 and 1, and then I'll move on to something else funny or on some other form in the afternoon. So quite often I just mix up the projects during the day, but I am very flexible and I can do it. Sometimes I'm doing it at the dead of night, you know, and I don't have set hours. And when you're a writer, I mean, I know a lot of writers who work best in the mornings and some who work best in the evenings, but I guess if you have a deadline, you just have to work best whenever you've got the time.
Yeah, and variety is the spice of life. It keeps things interesting. I'm a bit like you. I like to have 2 or 3 different things that I'm procrastinating at exactly the same time. You know, different things to put off and keep putting things off. No, that's great. I love the idea of the balance and basically filling your week. So I'm, you know, like you say, it's been an incredibly busy time for you. Are you hopeful that, do you think that pattern and that rhythm will continue for the foreseeable? Have you changed in your systems now from the last 18 months permanently, would you say?
Well, one of the big things that because of the pandemic is I don't know anymore. That's a huge thing. Before the pandemic, I mean, the week before the pandemic struck, I'm surprised I didn't catch COVID back then, because I was everywhere. I was in a dozen different schools. I was up and down the country. You know, I was in Glasgow at a festival. I was up north in Portsmouth, down south again. And that was the way. I think a lot of children's writers especially spend a lot of time traveling around schools and festivals and libraries. So there's a lot of travel involved. And it's great, you know, getting out to meet readers and working with kids and meeting kids is a brilliant part of it. That just stopped like that, and everything got cancelled. And in a way, it was. I mean, I was sad because, well, now it's gone on to virtual, so I meet from the comfort of my study. Kids, that's good, you know. But in other ways, what it did was allowed me to focus more on obviously when you're not here at your desk and you're out driving or visiting places, traveling, then I mean, you can do a certain amount of thinking when you're traveling, but mostly you're kind of concentrating on other things like getting to the place on time, finding your way, and trying not to crash. So that has helped me focus a little bit more on work and on writing,
Yeah.
and that's been. But I don't know if that will maybe. I mean, I know I've had some events coming back in tentatively with going to schools, maybe towards the end of the year. So maybe that will change. We'll just have to see, eh? But we don't know how things are going to pan out.
I get that. I imagine, yeah, would you say one of the most challenging things was, I imagine with children's fiction is seeing that sort of the immediate response, and hearing how interested they are in the questions. I always find children have the most pertinent and most sort of incisive questions, because they just want to know everything all the time about whatever they're interested in and their focus is. So I imagine going from that supply and the reactions and seeing the investment they get was, I'm assuming, or I will ask you, was it the most difficult part of the last 18 months?
Well, it was tricky. I mean, obviously it went like that, and suddenly I stopped meeting readers in person. And I thought at the beginning, I wasn't really set up to do virtual events, to meet children virtually. I'd never done it before, and I thought that's not going to. We're going to lose that interactive, that live thing. And then I started doing a few, and well, you'd be surprised at how much engagement there is. Usually, a lot of the schools, the classrooms, use things like Microsoft Teams. I've never used Zoom in a classroom, although other people do, but just Google Classroom and things like that. But these things are quite good because you end up on a big screen in front of the kids, and in some cases, I've been able to pull in 7 or 8 different classes, an entire school full of kids, able to engage with them. And the events do have to be shorter, I think, purely because you're not there in person and they're watching a screen. The events are I always aim for about 25 minutes or something like that. And I think that's something Edinburgh have picked up on this year.
Really?
Because events are maybe a little bit shorter. I think they know.
Yeah.
But yes. I always thought about questions and things like that and answers, because that was a really big part of what I did, was taking questions from kids, going around them, and they ask about writing. You can't fool kids, if they'll come out with it. And the kids will also be very direct. I don't know how many times I get the question, "Are you rich?" So that's kids for you, and I love it. I love hearing all the questions. But all the schools that I've engaged with virtually, we've been able to do. We've brought kids up to the front of the classroom and they've asked questions, and I've answered them, and so we've still been able to do it. It works.
Yeah,
it does work.
I'm so happy it does, because I mean I remember being back in my younger days in the ancient times of sort of the mid 2000s and going to talks and stuff. I remember we in Morley Town Hall, where I'm from, we had Derek Landy, who writes the Skullduggery Pleasant books, and he came in and gave a talk, and I just thought he was the funniest man in the world. He was telling a story about his cats, and one of them scratched him, and I was the only one really laughing, but I went for it. And with the Q&A and the answers, he had a rapt attention. It was a rapt audience. He was a rock star, So fantastic. Hold on, I'll cut this bit out. I just need to look at my questions. So there we go. Yes. So is a large sort of draw, especially writing historical fiction for children. Do you have an element that makes you want to get kids invested in history and invested in the stories?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of kids don't need to be invested because they are already invested, especially with Vikings. I think other time periods are more difficult. I know, for example, like ancient Greece, well, maybe not so much, but if you're setting something in ancient Greece, I think that's a harder sell. But the Vikings, because kids do it in school all over the country, in the UK anyway, it's easier, and it's a very easy pathway into historical fiction. There are a lot of excellent books set in the Viking Age, I think, or the Anglo Age, which again the kids tend to do a lot in school. So, but there are kids who aren't really naturally invested in it, and I think the thing for them is character, and if you can access it through that, because the best books, obviously, you've got characters who drive the story along and a great story that will snap anyone up, really, who's who's attuned, who's able to be snapped up. That's really important. That's another pathway into historical fiction, and if they read that and enjoy it, well, they may go on to other things. I used to love Rosemary Sutcliffe when I was about 11. Rosemary Sutcliffe wrote, obviously, the Eagle of the Ninth, and a whole series of other books. But I didn't get into Rosemary Sutcliffe straight away. I was reading simpler books about periods in history, and then that was a pathway into reading Rosemary Sutcliffe, whose books were phenomenal. Carnegie winning author many times, and that was a pathway, that was a pathway that I took, and I might never have got there had I not started off on stuff that's maybe a bit simpler. The Thorfinn and the Velda books are all quite simple, straightforward chapter books for kids maybe about 6 and upwards, and it's an easy little stepping stone into things like historical fiction. That's what I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's sort of children find their tastes, don't they? There's nothing worse than I don't know, when people phone in and they assume that just because something is marketed heavily at children that they're not discerning in any way. They know what they like. I mean, I was the same when I was thinking about this last night. There's an American author called Rodman Philbrick, who wrote Freak the Mike Team and books called Fire Pony and Lobster Boy. Now it's sort of in this Steinbeckian prose. So the short staccato sentences. And I remember reading them when I was about 12 or 13 and thinking, they were very funny and very exciting and all this stuff going on. Now, in retrospect, the subject matter in all of them is incredibly dark. A lot of them are about like broken homes and sort of smaller, like the minutiae of like American life and abuse and stuff like this. And obviously, even though that didn't register at the time, I love the fact that Rodman Philbrick was able to infuse those themes and topics into his text in such an engaging and easily digestible way. Yeah.
That's
fantastic. Sorry, say again.
Be able to do that, it's a real art.
Yeah.
Because a lot of stuff might not pass. I've written stuff. I've got editors. Editors are your gatekeepers, obviously. You write stuff, and in the case of the Thorfinn and the Velda books, it could just be a joke. And the editor will say, you can't do that. No, we're not having that. I can't draw you any examples, but I have written entire books in the past, which, looking back in retrospect, I can see why they weren't published as children's books, because maybe they're a bit too much. So I think there's a real art in that, to be able to introduce these themes and be past editors and to do it in an easily digestible way,
Yeah, no, definitely. So where next for the Thorfinn and Velda books, or your other 3 ongoing projects at the moment?
Oh yeah, well, I've got plenty of ideas for. With the Thorfinn books, I've already written about 8 of those books, and the thing that keeps them going is the characters, the sparks between the characters, because you've got this kid called Thorfinn who's a nice Viking, that's him, and then you've got the Vikings who are comedy, kind of mean and rough, and they've got huge beards and they smell a lot and all the rest of it, and they just clash together, and that's where the stories. And I've got loads of ideas for stories, for various different types of stories for that. And then I've got Velda. Those books are slightly different, and they're more about loyalty and friendship. And I'm kind of working through all my favorite Norse myths. So the one I'm working on just now, which is a sequel to Velda, the Awesomest Viking, and the Voyage of Death, it's about giants, and it's based on my favorite ever Norse legend, which is the Norse, which is about Thor, when he has to dress up as a bride to get into a giant's to go into a giant's wedding. So it's kind of based on that, really. Okay. Yeah,
that sounds fantastic.
So I've got various projects all kind of lined up, but as you know, with a writer, as a writer, you have to just keep writing, and I think sending stuff off and trying to float some ideas and see where they all come out. When I first started off writing as a living, I was always about when my next project was going to come to fruition, if it ever was going to come to fruition. And what if this book is my last book? Oh no. But now I'm not so worried about it. I just float the ideas off. And generally, my feeling is now everything will be fine. It will work out. You know, something will come of that. Or if something doesn't come of that, then something will come of this other idea that I've got. So yeah, everything. And I really just want to continue my my way of life that I've got here. That sounds really smug. You know,
You know what you like, you know what you want. You're allowed to enjoy the finer things as a successful author, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Why wouldn't you? Why shouldn't you go to Waitrose? Why shouldn't you do those things? You're allowed.
Yeah, and you know, my sports car obviously sits and everything. The kids are always asking me about it, so I always tell them, you know, yeah, I've got a sports car. I am rich, yeah. I'm loaded. I'm minted. That's usually my answer to that question.
That's great to know. I'm in the wrong industry then. That's really good to know. It's good to have an incentive.
Yeah.
Well, David Macphail, thank you so much. When can we see you at the Edinburgh International Book Festival?
I'm there on the 31st of August at 2 p.m. I remember that well, didn't I?
Yep.
And I'm online as well as in person. So I will be in person, which will actually be quite amazing.
Yeah.
But hybridization thing, if that's the right word, this hybrid event thing's a really good idea, because I think you said something before about, did you say inclusion or accessibility?
Accessibility.
I think that's a really good. And there's plenty of people, even in the best of times, would never have made it to the book festival, either for geography or for other reasons. To be able to make your event accessible to them, I think, is the way to go. So maybe this is the way, you know, for future.
Yeah, hopefully. Well, hopefully this is the way for your future. Hopefully the future holds for you even more greater success. Thank you so much for speaking to me, David. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome, Chris.
Okay, all the best.
All the best. I'll see you later.